We will continue to see sea level rise more rapidly. We will continue to see warming. So we have to be prepared for that. We have to begin adapting.
But adapting is not easy in a culture that has thrived for 500 years. Today, on This American Land.
What a mother does during pregnancy can have all sorts of effects on her babies.
Changes in habitat are making some mothers' roles more difficult. It's not just about speed for these young athletes. Running through extraordinary Oregon vistas is making a lasting impression.
You damage the environment, you contaminate the water, you fix it.
And renewed efforts to mine uranium have some New Mexico residents worried about dredging up old contaminants. Those stories and more now on This American Land. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trust.
Hello and welcome to This American Land. I'm Caroline Ravel.
And I'm Bruce Burkhart. On every show, we'll bring you thoughtful stories about protecting our natural resources. And we'll take you to some of the most beautiful places you may never have heard of.
Our first story takes us to Eastern Oregon. For more than 3 decades, high school runners have traveled to the Steens Mountain running camp. The lessons they learn go far beyond athletic competition. Marsha Walton has our story.
"7:30, we meet in the corral where the aid station is, and we go for little minute runs, trying to get everybody used to the altitude. And so be dressed to run.
It's not just a physical venture. It's so much more than that, but you use the physical, you use the running in order to get at somebody's heart and head and allow them to breathe in this place and then take it home and give it to others.
For 36 years, Harlan Wyarty and counselors at the Steens Mountain Running Camp have roused teenagers at sunup. The camp is on 160 acres of private land in the mountains of eastern Oregon.
This is too beautiful to pass up. With eyes, ears, smell. You can smell the juniper right now after this rain and this age. It's just amazing. Heightens the senses. My grandparents came from Spain in 1919, 1920.
Wyarty's family, Basque sheep herders, settled the magnificent Steens Mountain area. He was Oregon's high school champion discus thrower. He's coached college track and field, and since 1975 started inspiring young athletes by getting them out of their comfort zones and into this remote, inspiring mountain setting.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Day 1, get used to camp, altitude, and each other.
Breathing with your stretching helps a lot.
10-4, go! 5, go!
So why do these kids give up texting, video games, and sleeping in for structure and discipline?
A lot of running is mental, so when you get the right mindset, it's a lot easier to run harder and longer.
During a race, it's hard, but afterwards it just, I don't know, it makes me feel really good and really confident, and just that if I'm able to do something like that, I can do a lot of other things too.
The legendary event here is simply known as the Big Day. About 30 miles on roads, across rivers, through breathtaking canyons.
And about then you were going, I just want to sit down on this trail and let the coyotes get me.
What we're doing up here is putting you in the wilderness.
Michael T. Smith has been a coach here for decades. Counselors stress the long-term payoffs.
I tell them it's going to be tough, but it's going to be really good. It's going to be an experience that you're going to look back at. When you start your cross-country season back at home, you're going to look back at this day and think, I made it through. I walked and ran those 26 miles down and up and through a canyon.
So, make it a plan tomorrow to when you are the tiredest you've ever been, to come up to somebody and be kind to them. Excitement, guys?
Yeah, dude. I love the big day.
After a pancake breakfast and making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the road, it was time. Even for these mountains, wind chills in the 30s in July were unusual.
You gotta huddle behind each other like we're paying.
Yeah, how's that working for you?
It's working really well. My ears are really warm now.
From snow to a rapidly flowing river, where that teamwork message comes into play.
Yeah!
There's 4 places you guys get rid of garbage. They're taped to the sides of the trucks.
The mantra of being good stewards of the earth is a constant one. Follow-up crews make sure nothing is left behind on the trails from these runners or anyone else.
We have picked up a water bottle on the trail, but that's what our sweep crew is all about. So whether it be a little, straw or in some cases a cigarette butt, that's our job to sweep through that.
Thanks. You guys the first one's done?
No, sort of.
More than 10 hours into the big day, a successful finish for most campers. Not a race, a life experience.
What was the toughest moment? Was there a moment of doubt ever?
The start was freezing and it was kind of miserable. It was so cold. Yeah. I had my socks and my hands. I was so cold.
It was worth it though.
Yeah, definitely.
It was definitely fun.
Yeah.
You do. Oh.
At the finish, a personal congratulations from Wyardi, who has an amazing recollection of names, faces, and track records.
Richard Phillips Fennick III. Nice.
The big day can ignite long-lasting motivation. Campers often return as counselors.
I felt like I got so much out of the camp and as a high schooler, and I would feel like I'm cheating or stealing if I didn't give back.
We get letters from their parents, and they don't talk about how fast they are. They talk about how they say please and thank you and I love you and make their beds and wash their dishes and go about their life in a much more purposeful way.
How you feeling?
Good.
Good day?
Yeah, great.
For This American Land, I'm Marsha Walton.
Elevation can change from less than 4,000 feet to over 9,000 feet in just a few miles around Steens Mountain. Rocky Mountain elk, mule deer, mountain lion, and bighorn sheep make this corner of southeast Oregon their home.
Like a lot of mining ventures, the search for uranium in the American Southwest includes a long list of booms and busts.
But the cleanup from extracting this radioactive material has often been an afterthought. A new effort to start mining in New Mexico has residents asking a lot of questions.
In northern New Mexico, on land held sacred by Native Americans, plans are underway to once again begin mining of one of the richest uranium deposits in America. Communities around Mount Taylor have endured boom and bust brought by uranium, but residents here continue to live with a dark legacy of environmental contamination from uranium mining and are concerned by the renewed push for uranium development.
The amount of water that the uranium mining companies would use is a huge amount of water. We're talking about 12 million gallons per day that would be taken out of the mine and would run off on the surface of the earth.
I have a real problem if those mines discharge their water down through this water course, because they will remobilize a lot of the contaminants that are at this point in time semi-locked up in the ground.
Today, mounds of toxic waste from uranium production and abandoned mining operations number in the hundreds across New Mexico. Community water supplies have been rendered useless, where mounds of mining waste continue to seep into local aquifers.
There wasn't much thought put into getting rid of the waste because it's an indigenous country, low-income people in their area, sparsely populated.
Companies that maintain contaminated uranium sites say complete restoration of the land is cost prohibitive. Many more sites have been abandoned altogether. That may change, however, under new legislation in Congress that would recategorize uranium as an energy source similar to oil or gas. Under the new law, companies would lease land from the government and pay royalties on the uranium they produce, royalties that could fund cleanup of contaminated sites.
These uranium mines out there are currently being cleaned up with taxpayer money. I would think that a lot of folks in Congress would see finally charging a royalty to the uranium mining industry as a good thing.
You broke something, you had to fix it. Like you damaged the environment, you contaminated the water, you fix it. So in our way of life, the traditional and cultural way, we say healing.
In the United States, the uranium mining industry began in the 1940s, primarily to produce uranium for weapons and later for nuclear fuel. Most mining locations are in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and Wyoming, with about 75% on federal and tribal lands.
You hear a lot about climate change, with dramatic pictures from the Arctic and the South Pacific. But is it happening everywhere, and what will it mean? Natalie Pavelski-Rogers visited one part of the U.S. that's already seeing some changes, the Chesapeake Bay, and an island with a doubtful future.
The Chesapeake Bay, 200 miles long up to 30 miles wide, home to more than 3,000 species of animals and plants. America's largest estuary produces about 500 million pounds of fish and seafood every year.
H.L. Mencken, the Bard of Baltimore, referred to the bay as an immense protein factory. It's something that just continues to produce and produce year in and year out.
In recent decades, though, the bay has faced its share of challenges: pollution and runoff from surrounding states, fights over fishing limits, and whether seafood is being over-harvested, development, and the destruction of buffer zones and wildlife habitat. Now the Chesapeake Bay is facing a new problem: climate change.
Now, climate change isn't something just for the future. Climate change is actually here today. For example, the bay's waters have warmed on the average about 2 degrees since the 50s. Sea level during the 20th century rose about a foot. It accelerated during the 20th century, and we're very curious about how it's going to continue to rise into the future.
Rising, warmer water is stressing wildlife and underwater grasses. And there's evidence climate change is exacerbating the dead zone that kills off marine life each summer. But climate change in the Chesapeake Bay doesn't only affect wildlife and natural habitat. Climate change, especially sea level rise, affects the people who live here, too. To see sea level rise in action, you take a ferry boat from Crisfield, Maryland, and head west about 12 miles to Smith Island in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. First settled in the 1600s, there are 200-some people living here now, down from about 800 a century ago. Everybody knows each other, there's no jail, and no police force.
And if someone does something, you pretty well know who it is. Or you can guess. It's safe, it's quiet.
Each of the 3 tiny villages on Smith Island has its own Methodist church. They share one pastor, Rick Edmond, who moved here 11 years ago.
I was leery to move over here right at first because the only other time I was here, we couldn't travel around in the school bus for tours because the tide was so high. And since it was a little daunting at first, thinking that you're only 3 or 4 feet above sea level, but you get used to that. Any sea level rise we'll notice here.
I know in the 1930s, I was a little boy then, 7 or 8 years old.
The island's unofficial historian, Jennings Evans, can trace his family back 13 generations to a time when there was a lot more land to go around.
Half of it's gone from what it used to be, you know. I've come across records where so many thousand acres were sold to this guy and so many another 2,000, 3,000 to another. And you say, where was that at, you know? And the thing it is, they're underwater and gone.
Land in this part of the world is always sinking thanks to a geological process called subsidence. But now, with rising sea levels, land is disappearing even faster. Smith Island's fate is a preview of what could happen to low-lying islands everywhere as Earth's climate warms.
We will continue to see sea level rise more rapidly. We will continue to see warming. So we have to be prepared for that. We have to begin adapting.
Smith Islanders are nothing if not adaptable. They turned to crab fishing and oystering when their dwindling farmland gave out. The Chesapeake Bay's bounty supports most families here, but it is not an easy life.
90% of the kids that grow up here, they want more education and a better way of life, so they leave. It's just looking a little grim, but we'll be here as long as God wants us here.
You hear that a lot from Smith Islanders, a mix of faith and acceptance.
Most people believe that this island's got no business of being here without somebody else's help, somebody stronger than us, you know. It's been here for hundreds of years.
Without a miracle, though, scientists figure sometime in the next few decades, certainly by the end of the century, this island will sink into the bay, and Smith Island will exist only in memory. Pastor Rick, who has testified before Congress on how climate change and sea level rise affect his flock here on Smith Island, sees a lesson in all of this.
Adam and Eve were given a command to till and to keep the earth, keep the Garden of Eden. And I think that applies to the whole world as well. Humans are certainly supposed to be using the resources wisely, but trying to keep them also for future generations. And we also need to respect the rest of God's creation.
For This American Land, I'm Natalie Pavelski-Rogers.
Smith Island was first mapped by Captain John Smith in 1608. It was settled in the 1650s by settlers from Wales and England.
Pronghorn are found only in the plains and grasslands of North America. They're sometimes called antelope, but they're far different from deer and elk and other hooved animals.
Pronghorn face many obstacles as they make the sometimes 400-mile round trip from their summer to their winter ranges. Gary Stryker has our story.
There's 3, 4, I think there's a bunch around that point maybe.
Photographer Michael Forsberg and World Wildlife Fund biologist Dennis Jorgensen have been closely tracking the plight of these pronghorn. They're stranded on the remote southern shore of the Missouri River, where it crosses through this wildlife refuge in north-central Montana. This is the latest twist in new research funded by several public and private partners, showing just how far these animals travel and what obstacles they face.
The furthest north that any of the pronghorn that we collared traveled was to Reed Lake, Saskatchewan, and the furthest south was a place called Ingomar, Montana, and the two are about 260 miles apart.
Tracking more than 100 of these dual citizens has revealed that some move more than 400 miles round trip.
World Wildlife Fund considers this migration corridor globally significant, both because it's one of the longest migrations in North America, but also because migration really is a threatened process worldwide.
During the final year of the 3-year study, for the first time, some of the research animals crossed the frozen Missouri River. Now the river is thawed and swollen with spring runoff. A downstream dam is also backing up water, making this river a mile-wide reservoir. Forsberg and Jorgensen are watching to see if the pronghorn can make it back north to their traditional summer ranges.
We're going in to retrieve 2 remote cameras.
One is a camera trap where animals crossing through an infrared beam take their own picture. The other is remotely triggered by a walkie-talkie.
These cameras are placed about 50 yards from each other in an area that Dennis Jorgensen and I watched over and over again, where animals were moving along the shoreline, coming to points.
They videotaped this pronghorn swimming across the river, exhausted. She is one of the few they see succeed. It's unclear what kind of toll this may have, especially on pregnant females, typically giving birth by now. Although many appear stranded, not going south would also have had consequences.
Malta area traffic, Skyhawk 8246 Bravo, departing runway 26 will be...
This past winter, one of the few places that were snow-free was the train tracks. So often the Pronghorn were coming to the train tracks to get out of the deep snow and take refuge there. The train would come and they wouldn't get out of the way, and so we ended up with somewhere near 1,000 Pronghorn hit on the High Line.
On the ground, grim evidence remains of one of the most severe winters ever recorded on this northern prairie. Pronghorn froze to death or starved when deep snow kept them from finding forage. Hundreds more died from eating hay, which they're not adapted to digest. Those that migrated south escaped those conditions, but now face new obstacles.
There's 18 things that tripped the infrared beam. There's a few photos on here, and it's right at twilight, so there's a little bit of ghosting. Oh, wow. Well, you guys should see this stuff. It's pretty good. And there's a couple right in the middle of the day.
As Pronghorn climbed up the bank and past his camera, Forsberg fired the remote trigger. For him, these photos are visual data, showing how wildlife respond to extreme weather, an event that may happen only once in an animal's lifetime.
This is a natural history moment that may not repeat itself again for years.
The photos illustrate a perilous transboundary journey filled with barriers, both natural and man-made. A journey Jorgensen hopes might be made easier as conservationists, landowners, wildlife managers, and transportation experts come to understand just how many obstacles are faced by migrating pronghorn. For This American Land, I'm Gary Stryker.
The pronghorn has eyes almost as large as an elephant's on a body the size of a goat. The herd travels as one, not leaving a single animal open to attack from their traditional enemy, the wolf.
Swimming, diving, dodging predators, young ducklings have to learn life lessons quickly in order to survive.
Scientists are discovering that what mama birds do, even before their eggs hatch, can have an impact on their offspring. Miles O'Brien has our Science Nation report.
Mama bird knows best when it comes to taking care of her babies. But when food gets scarce and she is forced to fly longer distances to grab a bite, her egg-sitting time drops off. What impact does this have on her brood?
I guess everybody, even from a human health perspective, knows that what a mother does during pregnancy can have all sorts of effects on her babies. And so we study how these little guys can be affected by the things that mom does.
If you look really closely, you can see that embryo moving some. So he's moving right here.
With support from the National Science Foundation, ecologists Bill Hopkins and Sarah Durant are studying wood ducks to better understand the impact of mom's nesting behavior on her ducklings and their ability to survive.
The specific maternal effect I'm looking in is incubation temperature. So how much time a female spends on her nest is going to influence the temperature that that nest is at.
They're finding that just a slightly cooler nest can dramatically alter the health and vitality of a duckling. They incubate eggs at different temperatures to simulate warmer and cooler nesting conditions.
So our embryos in the lowest temperature are going to develop a little bit slower than embryos in our higher temperatures.
And once hatched,
they may look healthy, but if you actually dig a little deeper, we see they have a number of physiological deficits, so their immune systems aren't developing as rapidly. They appear to be almost developmentally stunted. We see that they have changes in terms of endocrine function, in terms of stress hormones. These little guys, if they are incubated at a degree lower temperature, they actually swim slower. Up to 2 to 3 weeks after hatching, they swim slower than the same individuals from the same clutch, very similar genetic makeup. They swim slower than those guys just because of the temperature at which they were incubated. So swimming is a critical part of their early survival. They've got to avoid predators, they've got to compete with each other, basically, with their siblings for food.
this research is not just about wood ducks. It has implications for many birds living in conditions where their nesting behaviors and habitats are disrupted.
If their immune system isn't functioning as well as it needs to be and disease wipes through, then those guys aren't going to make it.
Hopkins hopes these findings will improve future conservation strategies.
If you have an area, say, that's subjected to ecotourism, where you may have a lot of disturbance around nesting areas, those sorts of areas may actually come at a cost. They may actually come at a physiological or behavioral cost to some of these early guys that are developing in this situation where they might be disturbed, where their mothers might be flushed off the nest more frequently.
That could adversely affect the health and vigor of future generations. Hopkins and his team want to learn all they can about what it will take to keep these little guys thriving and following in Mom's footsteps. For Science Nation, I'm Miles O'Brien.
One of the stories we're working on for a future show.
We can thank the spirit and the embodiment of the buffalo to help us survive, prosper, and proliferate.
From tens of millions of these mighty creatures to near extinction, we'll look at the resurgence of the buffalo and their place in Native American culture.
And every week, we'll bring you stories about issues affecting our natural resources and introduce you to people working to protect our landscapes, waters, and wildlife. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts,